This is one of the last weeks you can make a trade in your fantasy football league before the deadline hits. So in this video, we are breaking down the 10 players that you need to trade for and trade off your team if you actually want to win your fantasy league. And let's start with Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals, who was taken by many people in the second or third round of their fantasy draft this past August and summer. And honestly, for good reason. We love Chase Brown in this program, but once Joe Burrow went down early in the season with an injury, things became very bleak for that Bengals offense. But then Joe Flacco stepped in a couple of weeks later, and he's resurged basically the entire offense, including Chase Brown. And Chase Brown continued to find success this past week for 18 carries, 99 rushing yards, 5.5 yards per attempt. He didn't stop there, as he's been definitely activated once again in the receiving game with Joe Flacco under center. 6 catches, a team high 6 catches, 28 yards. So you're getting 25 touches this past week, over 120 total yards for Chase Brown, another 20 or so fantasy points. And he's just been so awesome, especially since Samaje Perine went down with injury back in like week 8. We're getting the Chase Brown we saw last year, these last couple of weeks. So look, you're basically getting 13 carries a game, 5 targets per game. But if you look specifically in these last few weeks, when indeed Samaje Perine went down with injury, what are you getting from Chase Brown? 12 carries, 11, 18 carries, so more workhorse usage, 3 catches, 8 catches on 14 targets. Remind you a lot of what you were seeing towards the end of last year with Joe Burrow, and 6 catches, 100 or more total yards in 4 straight games. I mean, it might have taken until the second half of the season, but just like last year in the second half of the season, Chase Brown is once again becoming a league winner. I mean, it's almost a spitting image. Remember the second half last year, 20 fantasy points per game between his receiving and rushing yards. He was having about 110 total yards per game. So far in the second half this season, these past 4 games or so, if you want to categorize that as the second half, you're getting the 110 total yards per game. You're getting the close to 20 fantasy points per game. It is literally a spitting image. And again, a lot of this has to do with Samaje Perine going down with injury. We've seen Chase Brown have elite usage these last 2 weeks since the veteran, really the only other running back in this backfield the Bengals have trusted in Samaje Perine, went down with injury. You can see Chase Brown in his first game before the bye week back in week 9, 95% of the snaps, 79% of the rush attempts, and 86% of the routes run. Literally one of the best usage games, if not the best usage game we've seen from a running back all season long, which is insane. It goes up there with some of Jonathan Taylor's performances this year. You get this past week, remains elite. Even after the bye week, Taj Brooks, the rookie, doesn't get elevated all that much. Chase Brown still seeing 83% of the snaps, 86% of the rush attempts, 83% of the routes run. I mean, this 86% or 83% of the routes is insane. Like anything touching 70% is elite for running backs. 80% is unreal. That's why it's leading to these 14 and 8 target games, and he's just locking in like minimum 4 catches right now, which is amazing for PPR formats. Now, of course, if the Bengals can hang around and stay competitive, they really needed to win this past week. Unfortunately, they didn't. You can see right here, according to Ian Rappaport, Joe Burrow is likely to be back on the field Thanksgiving or the following week. So there's a chance that Burrow comes back in a week or two. If that's the case, you could probably see pretty consistent usage for Chase Brown the rest of the season in terms of the offense moving the ball, running more plays, getting to the red zone. That helps the backfield. So Chase Brown right now is wheels up. If there's somebody in your league who had that bad taste in their mouth from the first half of the season when he was terrible in a terrible offense, things are turning around. Chase Brown right now, I'd rather have than DK Metcalf. I'd probably rather have than Ashton Genty. I'd probably rather have than Trevion Henderson. I know he's the new hot commodity. I think I'd rather have Chase Brown definitely than Nick Chubb, definitely than Stephon Diggs. Chase Brown looks like somebody, in my opinion, that based on those trades I just showed you over the past 24 hours, you can get right now at a pretty fair deal. And you could probably also get Oronde Gadsden, the 5th round rookie tight end for the Los Angeles Chargers, who just a couple of weeks ago looked like one of the best tight ends in fantasy football. But oh, how quickly things change and how quickly people's views on players change, because the past 2 weeks for Gadsden have been rough, but it requires context. Okay, 2 weeks ago, Gadsden has 3 catches for 13 yards early in that game, and then he ends up suffering an injury. He leaves that game with an injury, and he ends up being day-to-day. So he comes into this past week in week 11, banged up a little bit, but he plays. And he goes out there and he only has 2 catches for 41 yards in a game, though, where Justin Herbert literally had the worst performance of his career. Just 81 passing yards in 3/4 of play before getting pulled in a blowout. So I'm not going to hold this against Gadsden. 2 weeks ago, he was literally playing well. 3 early catches in the game, gets pulled with an injury. This past week, his quarterback doesn't even throw for 85 passing yards. So I'm not going to blame this on Gadsden. Now he's entering his bye week, which is important because it means it's going to be at least a month until Gadsden has been fantasy relevant for whoever has him in your league, which means you could probably buy low pretty much right now, especially with him on bye, currently getting 0 points on somebody's bench. Because check this out right here. Despite this past week, week 11, not being great for the Chargers offense, Oronde Gadsden was tied with Keenan Allen for a team high in first read target shares, according to Fantasy Points data. He was seeing 28.6% of Justin Herbert's first team target shares. Basically, since the past month of the season or so, since he's become more involved in the offense, last 6 weeks or so, he's been top 2 on the team in first read target shares as well, right there with Ladd McConkey. Let's not forget, I get it. it. Over the last couple of weeks, you've been frustrated with the injury and then the offense stinking. But before that, his 4 games before that, when he was breaking out, 18 fantasy points per game on 94 receiving yards per game. He was literally a top 3 fantasy tight end. And even rest of season, obviously Trey McBride's up there, Brock Bowers, George Kittle. But after that, like Tyler Warren, Oronde Gadsden, they're all in that same neighborhood for best tight end rest of season in that top 5 or so. This is a player who, as a rookie right now, ranks 4th in yards per route run amongst tight ends. He's been absolutely elite in terms of what his usage has been this year when he's been on the field. I mean, pretty solid. 20% target rate is pretty solid when you're competing with guys like Keenan Allen, Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, running backs out of the backfield as well. Your quarterback's also mobile, and he's still putting up these nice performances. This is a player that I want on my team if I don't already have an elite tight end. Look at some of the trades that you can get done for Oronde Gadsden right now. Zach Charbonnet 1-for-1, I'm doing that immediately. Cade Otton 1-for-1, I'm doing that immediately. If we scroll down a little bit more here, you can see a bunch of other deals. Mason Taylor 1-for-1, Jacoby Myers 1-for-1. I want all these deals. These are some that have happened in the past 24 hours. Get Oronde Gadsden, who after the bye week has a very good chance, especially if the Chargers offensive line can get a little bit healthier, to be a top 5 tight end rest of season. Next man up, we got to talk about Michael Wilson. And you might be saying, why are you recommending us to buy Michael Wilson? Wouldn't we be buying high on him? You definitely would be. And that's why I'm not recommending for you to buy him. I'm recommending for you to sell high on Michael Wilson if you can. Again, when I tell you to sell a player, it's not sell him for pennies or peanuts. It's see what the market is giving you. And if you're getting a good deal, you probably should cash in on what was going to most likely be Michael Wilson's best performance of his entire career and definitely the season. 15 catches for 185 yards, 30 plus fantasy points in a game where Marvin Harrison didn't play, Simeon Foku, Zay Jones are all on IR. Look, Michael Wilson is a legit wide receiver. He's produced in the past. He was awesome coming out as a 3rd-round pick out of Stanford who just dealt with injuries during college. I like Michael Wilson, big 215-pound ex-wide receiver, but I don't think he's going to keep producing like he just did this past week. Like, let's be honest. He's coming off of a game where Jacoby Brissett set the NFL record in completions for 47. So that alone is obviously the outlier amongst all outliers. He's coming off of a game where he saw a 32% target share with Marvin Harrison out. Marvin Harrison had only exceeded a 30% target share twice in his entire career. All these things are very good for Michael Wilson. He could definitely be a flex option for you moving forward, but there's a pretty good chance he's most likely, once Marvin Harrison comes back in maybe a week or two, gonna go back to being at best a flex option, most likely a bench player. So while you can, you might as well trade him for something valuable. Here's a pretty good tweet from Fantasy Guides. They say over on Twitter, notable players who have had their appendix removed, the appendix surgery, how long they've missed. Ben Roethlisberger, when he didn't miss just 1 game. Minka Fitzpatrick 1 game. Austin Hooper 2 games. So Marvin Harrison, it seems like at most he's probably gonna miss 1 more game, if that, right? And let's look at the game logs for Michael Wilson before the Marvin Harrison injury. I mean, he was basically non-existent in most of these games. 1 fantasy point, 8 fantasy points, 1, 5, 3, 8, 7, 9, 7, 33, right? One of these things is not like the other. The game where Marvin Harrison was out and Jacoby Brissett set the NFL record for completions. Again, he could be good moving forward. There's more injuries on this team than there were earlier in the year at the wide receiver position, but it's the perfect time to sell high. Here are some examples of trades that have happened in the past 24 hours. If we scroll up to the top here, I mean, a lot of these I'd rather just hold on to Michael Wilson compared to like Chris Rodriguez or Dalton Schultz. I'd probably take Jacoby Myers at this point over Michael Wilson. And the one that I really like that I saw, Tyron Tracy. Tyron Tracy, I'll buy him all day. I think he's an RB2, top 25 running back rest of season compared to Michael Wilson, who's definitely not a top 25 wide receiver rest of season. So if you can get a Tyron Tracy level player, if you can get a Jackson Dart top 5 quarterback since he's taken over in fantasy level player, I'd be doing that deal immediately 1-for-1 for Michael Wilson. Now, before we get into the next player, I've got something for the people watching who actually watch football, because I've teamed up with DraftKings Pick 6 to give you more ways to win while watching the games. Here's what I mean. All you do is pick more or less on 2 or more player stats, whether it's passing yards, touchdowns, stuff like that. And if your picks hit, well, you win. It's simple. There's no complicated rules. It's basically just you calling how a player performs and getting rewarded when you're right. Now, here's the part that you need to know. New DraftKings customers play $5 or more and get $50 in Pick 6 credits instantly. So if you're new to DraftKings Pick 6, you literally just play $5 or more and they'll drop $50 in Pick 6 credits into your account. All you have to do now is download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now to get in on the action, and make sure you sign up using promo code SAL to take advantage of this offer. In partnership with DraftKings Pick 6, the crown is yours. All right, now let's talk about a buy low running back, or at least a running back that I think you could buy for a fair price, and that's DeAndre Swift, who is quietly probably one of the quietest and least talked about RB1s, top 12 RBs in fantasy right now, averaging over 15 fantasy points per game, but nobody wants to talk about him because for some reason DeAndre Swift, the fantasy community hates this guy. Even though yet again he had 20 plus touches in a game, he only had 90 scoreless yards. So you look at his box score, he had no catches on 1 target, and he only gets you 9 fantasy points, which is opening up a buy low opportunity for an offense that has been running the ball a ton the past 6 weeks or so since their bye week. and DeAndre Swift, when healthy, has been at the head of that backfield. To the point where even though Kyle Monunga has spiked for some weeks this year, including a game where he had over 150 total yards, DeAndre Swift is still averaging 15 carries per game, 4 targets per game, those 19 overall touches per game, ranked top 10 amongst running backs. This past week, he continued to hold off the 7th-round rookie Kyle Monunga with 58% of the snaps, with a team-high 57% of the rush attempts, and a team-high 31% of the routes run. Continuing to operate as a workhorse running back for the Chicago Bears right now. They're just leaning on DeAndre Swift in this backfield. And honestly, this is one of the most efficient Swifts we've seen since probably his rookie season with Detroit, when, oh yeah, Ben Johnson was also his coach. Check this out. He's averaging 5.4 yards per touch, and he ranks near the top of the league in every single explosive play metric. Not to mention, he's up there in terms of top 10 in the NFL in breakaway runs of 10 and 15 plus yards. He's up there in terms of expected points added every time he touches the ball, how positively it is for his offense to score real life points. He's been very good this year and underrated. But it's like people forgot because he dealt with an injury and he only got them 14 points when he returned from that, and he only got 9 points last week. But just look back a little bit here. You're getting a top 20 finish, a top 20 finish, a top 10 finish, a top 10 finish, a top 20 finish. These are his performances besides this last week where he had 21 touches for 90 yards and just didn't happen to find the end zone. This has been a very good running back for you. Look at these 1-for-1 deals. 1-for-1 for quarterbacks like Matthew Stafford and Jackson Dart. I'm doing that. 1-for-1 for Quinshon Judkins at this point. I'm doing that because Swift is in a better offense and gives you more pass catching upside. 1-for-1 for Jaylen Warren, who's currently banged up. Give me Swift. There's just a lot of pieces I'd rather have. I'd rather have Swift over Ricky Pearsall, Brock Purdy, even Tyron Tracy. I'd probably rather have Swift at this point over Brian Thomas as well. So lots of deals you can get done for DeAndre Swift, who is probably the most disrespected running back in fantasy football, despite right now being a top 10 RB in points per game on the year. Let's stick with the Chicago Bears here because I think you can continue to buy low on Rome Odunze, who's been so hot or cold for really the most part of the season, and he's coming off another one of those cold games. Just 2 catches, 41 yards in this game on 5 targets, but honestly, it's just because they didn't throw a lot. They threw 32 times. Caleb Williams only completed 16 of those, 50% of his passes, compared to 39 rush attempts by the offense in this game. So look, I know Odunze didn't have a big game here, but based on his season-long usage, based on how good he's been all year long, especially around the red zone for this team, bigger days are coming down the stretch for your fantasy postseason. It's the perfect time to buy low. Because still on the season, he's averaging a strong 7.7 targets per game. Still on the season, he has a 23% target share, which jumps up to 26% in the red zone as a top option on this team. This is a guy who's just seeing a ton of downfield usage. Just a lot of those targets, like this past week where Caleb Williams only completed 50% of his passes, at times go incomplete because of inaccurate passes, uncatchable passes. But this is a guy who's still a top 20 wide receiver in points per game, averaging over 13 points per game this season. We've seen stretches where he's been a clear wide receiver one in fantasy to start the year with 16 points, 32, 15, and 17, and then he hits some cold spurts before popping off for 18, and then he gets you a goose egg and he goes for 21, and now it's been hot and cold back and forth, just 6 points this past week. It's very easy for him to go back out there in games, especially against division rivals coming up, that they're not going to be able to play with leads, maybe play from behind or in neutral game scripts, and Odunze is quickly seeing 10 plus targets, and he looks like a top wide receiver. So I'm still trying to buy Rome Odunze to the point where Deebo Samuel, yes, 1-for-1. Amarion Hampton, yes, 1-for-1. Brian Thomas, yes, 1-for-1. Aaron Jones, all these deals. Arondé Gadsden, Travion Henderson, all these deals, I'm taking the Rome Odunze side. Rome Odunze for Tedero McMillan is like the closest one that I would consider. McMillan off of a big game, probably worth considering selling high, in my opinion, for Rome Odunze. I still think Odunze is a borderline like top 30 rest of season player, would be probably like a 3rd round pick if we redrafted today compared to a lot of those other names. Maybe Henderson and McMillan are the closest. If you don't want to trade them, that's fine, but I think there's a lot of fair deals you can get done off of a down game for Odunze. Let's talk Woody Marks now, a rookie running back, a 4th round rookie running back for the Houston Texans, who's had the perfect run out this year because Dameon Pierce got hurt and Nick Chubb hasn't been playing well, and Joe Mixon never suited up this season because of an off-season surgery that he wasn't supposed to get, so the team's mad at him. I'm not sure if that's public, but there you go. Maybe I've said too much. Oh well, because this past week, Woody Marks just had 18 carries, and look, he only had 2.4 yards per carries despite a good matchup against the Titans. Actually, the Titans' run defense isn't that bad. They just fall behind in games, so teams are able to run on them. So accounting-wise, they give up a lot of yards per game, but on a per-touch basis, it's actually not that bad. So I'm not surprised this wasn't a great game for Woody Marks, just 44 yards, but he had 18 carries in this game. He ends up adding a reception as well, so 19 total touches in this game compared to Nick Chubb, who was barely involved in this backfield. Nick Chubb this past week, just 14% of the rush attempts, just 25% of the snaps. It is now the Woody Marks backfield for the 2nd straight week. This past week, he played 66% of the snaps, according to Michael Florio over on Twitter, saw 86% of the backfield carries, and overall now, the past 2 weeks, he's operated as a workhorse. 2 weeks ago, they were trailing big in a game, and it was like, okay, maybe because it's a negative game script. No, this past week now in a neutral game script, and then they ended up leading. Yeah, it was the Woody Marks show. It looks like he's the guy moving forward. This is a helpful tweet as well from Chris Wetch over on Twitter. He says 2 weeks straight for Woody Marks has handled 100% of the snaps inside the 10-yard line. Season high 85% of the design carries in last week's game. This is a guy who over the last 2 weeks is 14th in expected fantasy points per game amongst amongst running backs. What that means is based on his role, he should be the RV14 in fantasy points the last 2 weeks, and rest of season on a week in and week out basis, especially with some weeks of bye weeks left, you're probably going to see Woody Marks be like every single week grading out as a top 24, maybe a top 20 to top 15 running back, depending on the matchup. This is a guy who can catch passes, can run between the tackles, can block. You want him on your teams if you can buy low. Now, some of the trades happening the last 24 hours, Sam Laporta, who's on IR, Daniel Jones. I mean, Travis Etienne's even a fair deal 1-for-1. I'd probably lean on the Etienne side with how much Jacksonville is running the ball right now and Tootin being a little bit banged up. But Jacoby Brissett, Ramondre Stevenson, even Deebo Samuel, Zach Charbonnet, all these deals have happened in the last 24 to 48 hours, 1-for-1 for Woody Marks. I want the Woody Marks deal side of this in basically all of these trades. All right, now this next one is going to ruffle some feathers, so let's just jump right into it. TreVeyon Henderson, I'm considering a sell high candidate. Again, just like I said with Michael Wilson, everybody's going to try to jump to the comments and say, why would I ever trade TreVeyon Henderson? You only trade him if you get a good enough deal. I'm not telling you to trade TreVeyon Henderson for a sack of shit. I'm telling you to trade TreVeyon Henderson for somebody that improves your team rest of season, especially once Ramondre Stevenson comes back, potentially even as soon as this week. Because TreVeyon Henderson has been amazing lately. He's gone with 150 total yards and 2 touchdowns and 93 total yards and 3 touchdowns the last 2 weeks for an RB4 finish of 28 points and a top 3 finish of 32 fantasy points. He's been arguably the best running back in fantasy football the last 2 weeks of the season. Probably has been. He's been incredible. This past week on Thursday Night Football, 19 carries, 62 yards, multiple rushing touchdowns, adds 5 catches for 31 yards and a touchdown. The most impressive part about this, he played an insane 90% of the snaps, 83% of the rush attempts, 81% of the routes run. Now, obviously, there was not really much else in this backfield. D'Ernest Johnson, they just didn't trust, but they trusted the rookie TreVeyon Henderson, who we've seen them be reluctant to go to at times this year. They trusted him to carry the entire workload with Terrell Jennings and Ramondre Stevenson banged up. But now the question becomes, Ramondre Stevenson, who was practicing in limited fashion last week, if he's able to suit up in week 12 or at worst week 13, what does his status look like and where does he come into this backfield? Like, is it just going to be the same TreVeyon Henderson show of 90% of the snaps? I'm a little skeptical. I would assume that TreVeyon Henderson has definitely carved out a larger role. He's making literally explosive game-winning plays for this team the last 2 weeks, so I would expect him to see much more usage than he was at the beginning of the season when Henderson was coming out here and only scoring, and really we should just look at his snap counts on Player Profiler, when he was coming out here and only playing 30% of the snaps, at best 45% of the snaps, 31, 14, 20, not involved. These last couple of weeks with Stevenson hurt, 77, 82, and then 90% this past week. These are elite workloads. I think he can maybe hold on to a 50 to 65% role, but it's yet to be seen, so there is some concerns on what the ceiling will look like in your fantasy playoffs since Stevenson is kind of looming. So some of the deals that I'm seeing right now, Ja'Marr Chase 1-for-1 after he's going to be suspended this upcoming week. Yeah, I want Ja'Marr Chase over TreVeyon Henderson. This is the type of hype I'm talking about. T. Higgins for TreVeyon Henderson, that's a pretty fair deal as well. Drake May, arguably a top 2 fantasy quarterback, at worst top 5 right now. I think that's a pretty fair deal 1-for-1. Zay Flowers is a pretty fair deal 1-for-1 if you don't believe that TreVeyon Henderson can sustain this once Ramondre Stevenson comes back. Same things can be said for guys like Chase Brown. There's a lot of good deals out there. I'm only showing you 1-for-1 deals, but you could probably get Chase Brown plus another piece in a deal. Drake May plus another piece because there's so much hype on TreVeyon Henderson justifiably the last 2 weeks. Don't sell him for nothing, but this is your opportunity if you want to improve your team. You can probably do so by selling the hottest commodity right now in fantasy. All right, so in this video, we're talking about a bunch of different players and positions to trade for and trade away, but if you want to see my #1 trade target at every single position for this week, I built a guide for all of you completely free. It's linked in the description below, or you can just type into your device, topfantasytrades.com, topfantasytrades.com. All you do is you enter your email right here, and I'll send it to you. Just be sure to check your spam and promotional folders. If you don't see it, like a couple of minutes after that, give it like 3 to 5 minutes. Next up, let's talk RJ Harvey, who's kind of similar in some ways to Woody Marks this week. They're both rookie running backs. RJ Harvey just taken in the second round with a lot more hype, but this past week, not the greatest performance. 11 carries for just 30 yards on the ground. He ends up somewhat salvaging his day, getting you like 6 or 7 fantasy points because he catches 3 balls for 20 yards. But in his first game without J.K. Dobbins, he was hyped up a ton in this matchup, a big game against the Kansas City Chiefs, and really he let people down. But under the hood, the usage didn't let people down. I mean, he played 61% of the snaps, 61% of the backfield carries, a team high 48% of the routes run. He was the one that Sean Payton trusted a ton, which is kind of what you expected because Tyler Bidet and Jaleel McLaughlin haven't played much this year. So RJ Harvey was the player who was trusted a ton in this game. If you look at the breakdown right here, he ends up seeing 38 snaps compared to just 8 for Jaleel McLaughlin, 8 for Tyler Batty in this game. RJ Harvey saw 14 opportunities. It was only 7 for Jaleel McLaughlin, 1 for Batty or Bidet, however you say his name. I apologize to the family, but RJ Harvey, at least for right now, is the clear guy moving forward, and J.K. Dobbins isn't returning probably this whole season, but definitely not for the fantasy part of the season. And by the way, this was a tough matchup against the Chiefs. Moving forward, though, great matchup against the Commanders. Great matchup against the Raiders. A matchup against the Packers where all of a sudden their run defense looks like it got exposed last week by the Giants. A good matchup at home against the Jaguars. Like this next month of the season, as you're fighting to get into the fantasy postseason or secure a bye. And then even starting the fantasy postseason, good matchups for RJ Harvey. This usage is encouraging. The production wasn't, but maybe people in your league won't be paying attention to the positive usage. So you might be able to get a deal done. Look at these 1-for-1 deals. Kyle Monunga I would do. Trevor Lawrence I would do. At this point, I would do Trey Benson. I'm just dealing with that injury. Kamani Vidal definitely with Amarian Hampton potentially going to return. Lots of deals you can get done 1-for-1 right now. Even Devonta Smith for RJ Harvey, who looks like rest of season, probably right around that top 20 or so RB. Next up, I want to talk about Romeo Doubs, who this past week, it was really difficult if you were a Packers fan or a fantasy manager of Romeo Doubs because he had 2 crucial drops. He actually had not the worst game ever, but if he would have caught those 2 balls, it's an extra probably 30 to 40 yards, maybe even a touchdown or more on his overall stat log. What the fuck is a stat log? His game log overall. Here you go. Look at it right here. Yet again, Romeo Doubs, the leading receiver at 32% target share for the Green Bay Packers. This is important because as JJ Zachariason, the late round quarterback, points out on Twitter, Romeo Doubs has now seen at least a 28% target share in 4 of his last 6 games. A 28% target share is elite numbers, but this past week, just 4 catches for 53 yards, still a team high in catches and a team high in receiving yards. If he would have caught those 2 balls, he's probably finishing his day with like 85 to 90 receiving yards. And once again, you're like, oh my God, Romeo Doubs is actually really good and the number 1 receiver for the Packers. But no, it was Christian Watson who had 2 touchdowns in this game, both in the end zone. He looked really good overall, Watson. So now he's stealing some of that shine, and he should be. He needs to be added in leagues. He could be started as a flex option, Christian Watson, but Romeo Doubs is still the number 1 receiver I want to be rostering on this team rest of season. Let's not forget, over the past 7 weeks, he's averaging nearly 13 fantasy points per game on 7.5 targets per game. I get it. Jayden Reed might come back in week 13, although it's a short week for the Packers on Thanksgiving. We might not see him until week 14. For right now, though, you could probably get Romeo Doubs for pennies on the dollar, and for like 5 out of the last 7 weeks, he's been fantasy relevant in your lineups. And upcoming matchups against division rivals and some good matchups in here, like 2 against the Bears and 1 against the Ravens in the postseason, are pretty encouraging as well. Romeo Doubs remains the most targeted Packers player right now, and he remains probably the most trusted when it comes to the red zone. The drops this past week, not really what Romeo Doubs is known for, so I'm not concerned about that moving forward. I think Doubs is a nice buy low. And some potential trades that can get it done, I like all these. Kyle Monunga 1-for-1, Dallas Goedert, Dalton Schultz, Devin Singletary, Xavier Worthy. I like all these deals 1-for-1 to acquire Romeo Doubs. Now let's talk about an elite wide receiver in Rashee Rice, a guy who's not going to be cheap to acquire, a guy who in my opinion is still like a top 15 player rest of season, but he just had finally had his first down game of the season, and really his first down game since 2023, because in 2024 until his injury he was great. So far this year he's been great. So it's been a while since we've seen a bad Rashee Rice game, which means it's pretty rare that this happens, which means it's pretty rare you have a buy low opportunity, or at least you can get him for maybe somewhat cheaper than you normally can. Because this past week Rashee Rice had 6 catches, 38 yards, about 10 fantasy points or so, which is not the worst game of all time, but he did not have good production, didn't find the end zone in this one, and for his first time in a while, didn't get to double-digit fantasy points. But what do we know? We know Patrick Mahomes loves targeting Rashee Rice. We know basically since his time dating back all the way from when he was a rookie back in 2023, if you take that stretch in his final couple of games, including the postseason from 2023 until today, here's what Rashee Rice is averaging. 15.2 fantasy points per game, 9 targets per game, and 80 receiving yards per game. During that stretch, he'd easily be a borderline top 12 wide receiver in fantasy. I still think he is that the rest of the season this year, if not top 5 wide receiver. It is the perfect time to buy him as his quarterback Patrick Mahomes has been playing better football as of late. You can see right here over the last 4 games, Mahomes is averaging 277 passing yards per game. This is a team that is now only has a 57% chance to make the postseason. They haven't had a great run game all year. I expect Mahomes these final couple of games of the year to really take on this offense through the passing attack, and Rashee Rice should be the number 1 beneficiary of that as they push to try and make a playoff run. So 1-for-1 deals aren't going to be cheap, and probably with a player like Rashee Rice, you're going to have to do like a 2-for-1 or something like that. But you could see Drake London was dealing with an injury. I'd trade him right now for Rashee Rice. AJ Brown, obviously I would trade for Rashee Rice. Josh Jacobs dealing with an injury, I would trade. James Cook is pretty close for a 1-for-1 across positions. I'd probably side with Rashee Rice there, but there's probably going to be like a 2-for-1 deal that you can get done there. Chase Brown plus somebody to acquire Rashee Rice feels pretty good. So these are the players that you should trade for and trade away. Many of your trade deadlines are this week. Some of you guys, if you're playing on Yahoo and Sleeper, are next week, but be sure to take advantage of this information, and also be sure to take advantage of any players that are still remaining on your waiver wire. I believe this is probably the best waiver wire of the entire season. So that video came out earlier this week. You can check it out right here. You can try and improve your team either through trades or the waivers. So check this video out. I think it's going to help you a ton.